I went and had a bunch of blood work done. Let's look at these. I know sometimes we have issues where we're talking about somebody else's numbers and we can't get more details from them. I'm right here. What do I need to do? This is Generation Health. Every week we bring you the latest in news, cutting-edge research, and time-tested best practices to help you live better, longer. Sitting to my right, Mr. Dante DiMatteo, registered pharmacist, certified strength and conditioning specialist. How are you, sir?
Doing well, Tyler. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad. And across from me, Joey DiMatteo.
I didn't ask you how you.
You don't need to.
You left it for me this time.
Joey DiMatteo, registered pharmacist.
I know what Joey's going to say.
I was literally just thinking, I am not going to ask if Dante asks. I was literally thinking that. I'm like, this time I'm going to make sure if he asks that I don't ask. And he didn't ask.
That is fantastic. Okay, well, you can ask. Registered pharmacist, board certified clinical nutritionist. How are you, Joey?
Very good, Tyler. And how are you, sir?
I am fantastic. Tongue-tied, but friend. Doing okay. My name is Tyler Andrews. And this week we got a couple of fun topics here. One very personal. We'll talk about that in a minute. We're going to talk about some water quality issues, and we're going to talk about your questions, which is what we'll lead off with. But first, the most important question is, if you were to get a tattoo, what would you get and where?
Boy, that's a tough one.
You want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Dante knows.
Answer. I like it.
Yeah, I actually do have an answer for this one because I was close to getting one.
Yeah.
So right now I'm tatless. But I was going to get, and this may come as a major surprise, I was going to get the...
I know it's coming.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
It was the cover of 808s and Heartbreak.
I knew it.
Of the Kanye album.
I think he and I had
it's
the
like
same
the
thought.
The Cause art.
Yes, yeah.
And so that was, I know Kanye's under some scrutiny these days, but that was a very... powerful album.
Yep.
A lot of it had to do with the passing of his mother.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very fitting, given some of the stuff that we had been through. And it's a great album separate from that. And
it was important to you.
Yeah, it was important.
But
it's red and I have fair skin. And so I felt that I probably would have looked like,
Where were you going to get it? Say lower back. Say it. No, where were you going to get it?
I was going to get it. I actually know. I don't know.
You didn't get that far.
No. Yeah, we're going to reopen this.
All right.
We're going to rethink about this.
All right. Joey?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I am not anti-tattoo at all, but I don't have one. So it's not like my answer here is, well, I don't have one because this, and this, and because my ultimate answer is that I don't like them or I don't believe in them or I don't want one for my body. Nothing like that. But first of all, it is superficial that I am pretty pale.
Yeah.
And so I think tattoos look better the darker you are. With black guys, I think look best. And I think as you go down
You think so?
I do.
That's
because
interesting.
I think the more that they contrast and stand out to me, then I don't know, they just get a little wonkier to me. I don't know, just personally.
Yeah.
So I am superficially have even a higher bar, I think, than normal about what I would choose.
Fair enough.
Then secondarily, my mind goes similar to Dante is, large life events, and my loss of life came at the same time as beginning of life, in the sense that my parents passed away around the same time that I was having children. So there was always this like crossing of even in my own mind of what was happening in my life. So I never could, that's where my mind went. And my sister got some tattoos around that time. And so I did think of things kind of as they were crossing, or can I incorporate these two things? And I never quite found anything that was kind of that juxtaposition or the put maybe where I was in my life. But that was the time where I was strongly considering it and nothing really just stood out to me. So that's really long-winded way of saying that I don't have one or a direct answer. But those are my thoughts. Those are my thoughts on a.
Yeah, I mean the theme is that like there's nothing wrong with you're out on a Tuesday and you want to get a tattoo. You pop in to see your artist and you get it done. But also like it felt like I can relate that if I don't have a perfect reason to do it, I'm not going to do it. But it's not like I think everything out that well in life. There's a lot of things I just totally forget it.
I would just have to think the tattoo 2, 3, 4, 5, if that's the route you're going, that they become a lot easier to do on a whim. the number one is the one that I can't get over that hump. You know?
It is a big commitment. I do have one, but yeah, I didn't get it till I was 27, and I've got my oldest son really wants them, you know, because he's super rock and roll.
They're more accepted and more in style now than ever.
Well,
even our generation versus his, that 10-year gap, 100%. It's a big change.
And it's one of those things now that when I look at it, I'm like, gosh, I kind of wish I hadn't gotten it just because it's so popular now. Everybody has tattoos. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't mind being the guy that stands out and is like, nah, I never got one. What? You got a problem with that? Mm-hmm. You know? But if I were to get another, well, okay, so my wife has told me that the only thing I'm allowed to get at this point is her name. So sorry, honey. I haven't gotten that yet, but I will if you want me to. No, there's some lyrics from a song that I loved, a song called Wooden Heart that was all about, we're all made out of shipwrecks, every single board washed and bound like crooked teeth on these rocky shores. So come on, let's wash each other with tears of joy and tears of grief.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've loved that. Okay, this is so bad. We probably should start over again, but we're not going to because it's more fun this way.
Someone will like that.
That's right.
Out there.
Somebody, the one listener we haven't lost yet. Here we go. Christiane emailed us. She emailed us at questions@askjoedimatteo.com. You can email us there as well. questions@askjoedimatteo.com. Hi there. I've been battling myalgic encephalomyelitis for over 8 years. I was diagnosed after I never fully recovered from mono. I am 48 and finding that exercise is getting more difficult for me, and I'm needing to rest more and more. I know some of it is aging, but want to be able to increase my energy at least a bit. Any suggestions for a nutraceutical or supplement? My PCP only wants to prescribe pain meds. Thank you. Loving the new podcast. Worked with Joe often in the past. He is always missed, but so happy to see you guys carrying on his mission. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. All right, guys, let's help her out. Christiane, myalgic encephalomyelitis.
A lot of different ways, I'm sure, to start this. You know, I just...
well, so what is this that she's dealing with? What I've never even heard of this.
Yeah, so the fancy name, it's just another name for chronic fatigue syndrome. So I think it's a good place to start.
Yes, I was gonna
Chronic fatigue syndrome.
Chronic fatigue.
I know what each of those words means individually. Together, they sound awful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that framing it as the myalgic encephalomyelitis, I think, has given patients dealing with this more, feel more, make it feel like it is an actual illness that needs treated, where I think a lot of people were dismissed in the past with, as nebulous and difficult as this is to diagnose. A lot of people may have felt unheard, unseen, overlooked with the chronic fatigue syndrome, titling. But nonetheless, that is another name for it. And so in looking at some of the symptoms, as she mentioned, we see individuals with significantly lowered ability to perform routine or previously normal tasks due to this fatigue. This previously tolerable level of activity then ultimately causes a worsening of symptoms, which is known as post-exertional fatigue. A lot of times they'll see issues with sleep, full nights of sleep, then kind of do nothing to help improve the symptoms that are sort of already starting to occur. And then in addition to this, from a diagnosis standpoint, one of the following is often present or must be present. Brain fog is a huge one, or any kind of other notable issues with cognition. Orthostatic intolerance is another huge one, which basically just means that, individuals will have issues when going from sitting to standing quickly. You notice that lightheaded feeling, which you can experience from time to time, but in this population, it is very much noted. And then chronic pain is also very common. And I know I kind of just jumped in, kind of into the symptoms there. It's
a syndrome. That's what it is a grouping of symptoms, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, this is another condition that doesn't come without controversy, and it's all stuff that hopefully we can kind of unpack here. But just at the outset, you want to add some stuff.
And I think along those lines, I think that a key thing to mention is, I remember 10, 15 years ago that this was even just, in talks or in articles you would read, or that it was essentially not accepted.
Yeah. Really?
That it was a real, and I think that's where Dante started a really good point by kind of using the technical term, and I noticed she used it too instead of chronic fatigue, because there's been some negative connotations associated with that. And I think it's one of those things that, yes, if you truly have it, that is a brutal barrier to have to kind of jump over. But as from a clinician side, you've got to start there, because it could be, and I don't mean to minimize these things, these are very serious things. I'm just saying some of these collection of symptoms, it can be just, I don't mean to say that word, depression. It can be just a
like
thyroid.
a singular. It could be more of a targeted diagnosis of something else.
Yes,
tons of overlap,
including mental health issues. You could be trauma. You're dealing with a trauma. So there's so many things that can still build up and be a part of true chronic fatigue. Can be a differential diagnosis or be the lone, again, air quotes, cause of the chronic fatigue. So I think that is something that, even if, this is something maybe you feel like you're dealing with or you're trying to unpack, that if you are getting what feels like a stiff arm, so to say, or pushback from a clinician, I don't think it's because they're saying that chronic fatigue doesn't exist or anything. It's just that that's part of the process to unpacking this, is to get them. I'm sure we can get there, but is some of the workup.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think a key thing too is that this kind of post-exertional malaise, or this essential diminished capacity just to do routine tasks, when it persists over 6 months, and there's not really an ebb and a flow, like, well, I didn't sleep really good for the last 3 days, so I was tired the next 2, but then I got some, there's not really like much of an ebb and flow to it. It's a pretty consistent lack of ability to do those basic things. It can delve into even other specific things, such as confusion and mood swings, some of those mental brain fog things Dante brought up, even into some lymph node issues, especially if it's post-infection, sensitivity to light, headaches. So it can go into so many different manifestations. That I think that that's also what makes it difficult. But I think what we don't know for sure the cause, but some of the links we're saying, 1 in 10 people who have had Epstein-Barr virus, which is the precursor to mono essentially, or can be. Ross River virus, also Coxiella burnetii, which is a bacteria that actually affects farm animals that can at times be transmitted. 1 in 10 people who have had that and who have recovered or seemingly recovered meet the criteria for symptoms of chronic fatigue. So you're seeing it linked to an immune system response to having those types of infections, such as the actual clinical way that it plays out can be again, these are somewhat hypothetical, but a chronic production of cytokines. So it's cytokines or it can be inflammatory, involved in the acute inflammatory response, such as interleukin 1, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor alpha. Something like tumor necrosis factor alpha is involved in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, things that you hear linked to autoimmune conditions.
I was just going to say, so this is something, it can be an autoimmune?
It can be
type of thing?
Yes, your body's response to having those infections named.
Wow.
Prior. Even just not to go off into these things, but sugars, can release some of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. So if you, again, I'm going to keep trying to draw that it becomes a syndrome of not only symptoms, but also maybe you've had this infection, maybe you've had an environmental exposure, maybe you've had chronic stress. And so these things have kind of come together and your body has responded in a certain way. So I think the symptoms themselves become very multi-systemic, affecting a lot of different things from mental to physical to, and then the causes or the roots of them can also be multifactorial as well. So I that's what personally that I have seen in trying to get to what can be the root of this, is that it could be multifactorial.
Dang. Mm-hmm. That stinks. Okay. So she says she's been dealing with it for 8 years. So presumably, and it's from mono, never fully recovered from mono. So I assume
which is the Epstein-Barr.
Right.
So that was, yes.
So she hasn't had the ebbs and flows. It's been a consistent problem for 8 years. That's rough. And she's trying to exercise. So that's a good thing. Does she need to, I'm guessing based on what you're saying, it doesn't matter to some extent how much she rests. If she has this, it's not just a matter of she needs to get an extra hour of sleep at night. she's just going to feel that way.
Yeah, it is tough. And to, I don't know, just shed further light into the difficulty of some of these recommendations. It's that because we don't have really any clue what's causing this specifically, we know we have these hypotheses, we have these hints, and we have these things that tend to be more associated with this, after those other conditions have resolved. It's just that then that leaves you in a position where you just often see symptom management and tons of supplements recommended and tons of questionable experts in a field such as this. And so that's why it's very hard to make concrete recommendations. And there's even been controversy with different papers, different studies that have come out about it. So there was the XMRV retrovirus, which was actually, there was a retracted paper that they took off out of the publications, that there was this specific retrovirus that they felt was linked to most people showing, the symptoms of chronic fatigue.
Yeah.
Later found that it was just issues with the actual blood testing, or there was something with the lab. And so,
whoopsie.
So it just has like this, in addition to it being sort of a nebulous thing to try and, diagnose.
Yeah.
You then have these unfortunate situations where you start hearing a paper was retracted, or this trial was nonsense, or the results of this trial were way overblown and it really doesn't work. Then you really start to paint such a negative picture on this, and it makes it difficult for patients actually dealing with this. So
yeah,
I don't know. Does saying all that really do a whole lot? No, but it just kind of shows how hard it is to, really put some black and white context to
Hopefully it helps to build empathy around this, that this is a big deal. And there's a reason that Christiane and other people like her probably struggle, not just because of the issues they're having, but also because so many people don't take it seriously, because it's got bad science around it.
Yep.
And lack of science around it.
Right. Yeah. But I think, and again, there's just so many different angles. Even the way I have this framed here kind of goes off in different ways. But I think back to Christiane specifically, it's difficult without kind of asking her more questions.
Sure.
To get to an answer for her. And hopefully in the midst of talking about it in general, I guess is kind of the approach I would take. Because I even just see some things here back before it was really, we'll call it accepted in 1984. There was literally an outbreak of it. I thought this was really interesting. An outbreak of CFS, then thought to be chronic Epstein-Barr. So the CDC eventually showed up. It was a town outside of Lake Tahoe. And that's where, again, you see the converging of symptoms. I mean, there was even a doctor who called it the depressed menopausal women disease, and then that was published after having gone up there. Then in the press, they got the nickname of the yuppie flu. So again, this is how helpful this is. That's very debatable. But again, these are just things that I found, and I think it goes back to just the general gist of this. So 10 years later, after that, they kind of went back and really studied what was going on, because I think they started to find that there were they found elevated antibody titers to herpes virus, Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus. So they believe that in this area, there was potentially a toxic outbreak of blue-green algae from Lake Tahoe. It's that right outside of Lake Tahoe. So now you've got the environmental factor.
Yeah.
And then they also found again that potentially with those elevated titers that there may have been a particularly virulent strain of herpes virus 6 that was in the area.
Wow.
So you've got this converging. Again, some of these things are so complicated. And I think if you do try to say, hey, this is exactly, in Christiane's case, it seems a little more black and white, but in other people's cases, how can you really pin down something like this? So say that to kind of bring it back down to what Dante brought up, which was individual symptom management. So the only medication that broadly has even come close to helping chronic fatigue as a whole is a medication that's brand named Ampligen.
Okay.
And it's an immunomodulatory drug. 2007, 2009, it had gone through the FDA process. It was not approved, lack of effectiveness data.
Wow.
But in 2021, it was back under review.
Okay.
So we have a gap here from, we're a year and a half, 2 years later. I don't know where exactly it stands, except for open label use. So essentially, it just means that there are trials. When you hear if patients are in trials for, usually it's a cancer drug or things like that. That's essentially what that means. There's a physician in Nevada, coincidentally, near Lake Tahoe, and then in North Carolina that are conducting essentially trials on the drug. So outside of that, because of its immunomodulatory effect, everything else here, even I went into some things that didn't work, and I don't know how beneficial that is, but our symptom management.
Okay.
And that's going to be critical here, is what exactly are you dealing with? And I think primarily too, especially maybe not in Christiane's case, but the full traditional medical workup, thyroid, iron, B12, blood sugar, how much that can affect energy level and moods, blood pressure, your sleeping patterns, all those things. Again, they're not going to be this one thing is the answer, but if you can start to piece together along with different exercise routines, et cetera, food, diet, we can go into all those things. But you can start to piece together things that can help you maybe not get over chronic fatigue, but can help your symptoms, then to get you maybe closer to where you need to be.
Right. Especially, I mean, if it turns out that you've got multiple things like you're talking about, all factoring into that, if you can fix those individual issues, it might help alleviate symptoms of the chronic fatigue as a whole.
Definitely. And pain gets very complicated because especially if you end up, God forbid, at the narcotic level, because those medications, they can give you an energy initially, but over time, the tolerance and the harm that they do to your body over time, really, and even in men, lowering testosterone levels, and then you need them to get even energy levels back. It becomes a really two-edged sword for these people, that it ends up helping their pain in the short term, and even potentially giving them some energy, depending on how your body individually reacts to it. But what it leads to down the road is only going to set you further and further back. So I would caution to whatever degree possible to avoid those, except in extreme cases.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's help Christiane. What does she need to be doing in terms of exercise first? Is that she's trying to exercise. She's 48 and she's worried that that's maybe why she's losing energy. Boy, I hope that's not the case, because that's not that far down the road for me. I don't want to lose steam at 48. What does she need to be doing on? What should she focus on in her training?
Yeah, this is a fascinating area, in my opinion. Because a lot of times you just hear, man, if you just exercise more, if you run, if you participate in these certain activities, it's going to be a boost in endorphins, and you're going to feel better, and all these sorts of things, where it's in the population suffering with the symptoms, suffering with this syndrome, it kind of has the potential to do the opposite. And there even have been some studies where they have kind of exercise management strategies that they'll call adaptive pacing therapy. They have graded exercise. And so these sorts of things are kind of what the names are sort of implying. Graded exercise exposure, you kind of just find a baseline for somebody and you start to titrate up as needed, and it sounds really good. Adaptive pacing theory is just another way to do kind of handle some of these things from a more like cognitive behavioral therapy perspective.
Sure.
And there were some individuals that even that this wasn't enough, and there were people in some of the trials whose symptoms were worse.
Wow.
And so it's very tricky. It's a very fine line when you're trying to find the right amount of exercise. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we just say stop exercising either.
Right.
And so the ultimate advice, I would say, and it's honestly at this point what I would recommend to anybody, and it's finding the appropriate entry point. And so you're going to have to play around a little bit. And so the idea with some of these pacing and graded exercise therapy sort of thoughts, the energy envelope theory is another one that's mentioned. They're all kind of saying the same thing. The idea is to participate in tolerable levels of physical activity or activities in general that are congruent with how you're feeling on a given day. And so always trying to find, I've even seen somewhere that said like, imagine your energy is like a bowl of marbles or a cup of marbles. I saw that on like a support group website, or you just view it as like you have a pail, your level of energy is a bucket and it's filled with water. And each day, each week, there's a certain fixed level that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so how you build the awareness to kind of know where you sit on a given day, on a given week is important for all activity, but it's especially important when you decide what sort of exercise you're going to be doing. And again, this is, people who kind of know what the heck they're talking about with exercise at this point, they're recommending this approach kind of to whoever anyway.
To everybody.
And so
Okay.
You'll often hear to it referred to as RPE based training or rate of perceived exertion. So whether you're doing conditioning or lifting, you're trying to just basically rank how you're feeling on a scale of 1 to 10, again, on a given day or a given week. And you want to try to match how you're feeling with that amount of exercise.
Makes sense.
So if you know that you can do X or Y on the rower or X or Y on just a stationary bike or whatever the case, the goal is to try and not surpass how you're ultimately feeling. And it's way easier said than done.
Right.
But because you always think of exercise as this continual process of overreaching, and you have to push and you have to try to surpass what your capabilities are to move the needle, to get stronger, to put on muscle. But really, as long as you're doing your best to match what you're bringing to the table on a given day, then that's what you got to do. If that means that you were supposed to do 4 sets of 10 on the leg extension and 20 minutes on the elliptical, if it's a day where your bucket is half full, it's 1 or 2 sets of 10. It's 10 minutes on the elliptical. It's less weight. Trying to get to the point where you're not afraid to deviate to match how you're feeling, and then on the flip side, there's a day that you feel great. And it doesn't mean you push to the limits, or you push like somebody who does not have this syndrome.
Right.
But you at least then say, maybe I'm going to go a little bit heavier on the 4 sets of 10.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to try to walk for an additional 10 minutes after all of this, on a given day. Or, I have more energy for, some of the tasks around the house that I've had to put off because of how I'm feeling. So it's super hard. It's all subjective measures of how you're feeling.
Learning to have grace for yourself when you don't have it, and being in tune with what your body is telling you so that you can respond in kind.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That seems like an awareness that everybody should have, but especially if they're dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome.
Definitely.
You set different goals than the average person.
Yeah.
I think that's a key thing. You're trying to get your body up to the ability to do basic tasks. You're not necessarily trying to train your body it's not even about true typical health exercise at that point. You're trying to just get back to what other people consider a baseline in a lot of cases.
So Christiana is asking about supplementation, and obviously she listened to your dad, so she's been around for a while. What can we do to help her there? Is there anything in particular, or is it just...
Yeah, I think that it's like everything else is individualized. I think to start, you always hear B12 for energy. Okay, if your B12 level's low, you hear about iron for energy. Yes, if your iron level's low. So I think those are always 2 things that always kind of catch. Yes, if those levels are low, then those things are going to help you with energy. So I think those are things that you can get tested, and I think are very critical for anybody suffering with lack of energy for any reason. But again, it's the testing of them. It's not necessarily the supplementing right off the bat. Now, along those lines, though, to differentiate between B12 and B complex, the whole family of Bs, why you hear B is a 12, there's many of them, is critical for base level energy production, not in the stimulant variety, but just for basic energy production in the body. Helps to, in a basic sense, turn carbs, proteins, fats into energy. For example, B vitamins, B6 can convert an amino acid that your body has broken down from a protein into a neurotransmitter, which can help with energy levels, et cetera. So I think those are critical things to at least be adding, especially because, again, so much of this is this cascade. Well, if you have trouble doing basic tasks around the home, what is a major task around the home? Cooking and food.
Yeah.
So what you end up doing, grabbing handfuls of pretzels instead of making a meal, grabbing a handful of, maybe if you can at least start to make improvements, a handful of almonds or fruit instead of a handful of pretzels. But those things become, have you gone to the grocery store? I mean, this is what we're talking about in a lot of these cases. So I think then the cascade becomes you're eating worse. So then, it's like the need for B vitamins does go up if you have a poor diet, if you're skipping breakfast, if you're grabbing that handful, all you've had is a handful of pretzels and chips that day. So I do think, again, the bar for who needs a B complex does fluctuate based on what your diet is like. And you can infer in a lot of these cases that there is some dietary limitations for various reasons.
Yeah.
So the iron and B12 we kind of covered, get those checked. More specifically though, there are some adaptogenic herbs that have been shown to help. With varying success, eleuthero, schizanda berry, licorice roots, rhodiola. Those are all different herbs that can be combined in individual products to help. We have a product, Cortisol Advanced, that combines those. It's a little more targeted to the fatigue, a little more stimulatory versus Adrenal Essentials that we carry. It's more rhodiola, relora based. It's a little more about stress adaptation. So if you are looking for something like that or dealing with that, the Cortisol Advanced is a little more geared towards chronic fatigue.
Okay.
And then very foundational things, omega-3s. They're foundational pieces to brain and nervous system health. They're anti-inflammatory that can help with different types of pain. They also have shown to have mood and cognitive benefits. So I think, again, going back to the whole cascade of this, your diet may be poor. Are you likely to be going to the grocery store and cooking fresh fish? So maybe you have very limited omega-3s in your diet. The bar for you, maybe you have a lot of inflammation in your body. Your bar for needing an omega-3 supplement can go up in these cases. Again, you're looking at a picture of everything. Vitamin D, critical immunomodulator. That's a foundational thing to everybody's health, really, but especially if you've got potential for what's an autoimmune condition. If you're having muscle pain and weakness, specifically, CoQ10 and L-carnitine can help. Again, that's another one. Hey, CoQ10 for energy. Well, it can help with muscular energy in certain cases, particularly whenever you've got a deficiency or you've got that weakness. Maybe you're on a statin medication that's potentially causing it, et cetera.
Sure.
So that's something you can look at again for muscle. Nootropics, those are kind of the new cutting edge things.
Okay.
With a lot of these types of things, for me personally, I do kind of lean on some of the companies that we work with. We've worked with them for years. We've added them, dropped some along the way. But until they're really on board with them, or until we find something that's really black or white and irrefutable, it's not something that personally I can speak to real positively or negatively. But I know they kind of come up again when you're looking for something that can be kind of stimulant based. If you're looking for energy, those can kind of come up. So at least just did want to touch on those. Don't really have a lot to say on them yet, but I think as time goes on, more and more, if they are valid, I think will start to come out. So that's again where I go supplement wise. I think with the medications, there are different angles you can take. I think that this would get more personalized as well.
Yeah.
There are, there's the anticonvulsant type medications that are like Lyrica and gabapentin. If you've got more nerve pain, they can also delve in if you've got nerve pain and sleep issues because they can be a little sedating. So certain pain medications, without going into jumping to the narcotics, like I mentioned, you can still do something like an anticonvulsant med technically is what it is, but that has shown to work for these things. And again, we're going down the cascade of that you've tried other things and so there's also a medication like Cymbalta. It is a pretty heavy medication and it can even be hard to get off of, but something, again, if you've worked through other options, it is an SSRI and an SNRI. So it's worked not just on serotonin, but also on norepinephrine. So you can have a little bit of that stimulatory benefit because it's inhibiting the reuptake of norepinephrine as well. So versus another traditional SSRI, that can have a dual side benefit, also has been helped for pain. So you may have chronic fatigue that has depression, that has some pain, maybe some nerve pain or chronic unexplained pain, and you're dealing with the fatigue. Something like Cymbalta can potentially help and touch multiple of those areas. So I think that therapies do become very individualized in that regard as well.
Yeah. Sounds like it. Okay. Well, but that's still good. That's a lot of good options, a lot of things that she can further research and talk to her doctor about. Christiane, thank you so much. Good luck with this. Just to recap real quickly, you were talking about rate of perceived exertion. Would you call it energy envelope or how do you say
energy envelope theory? Yes.
Probably worth looking up and seeing if you can find some of that to apply in your exercising. And then you mentioned, see if I got these all, B's, cortisol advanced, omega-3s, vitamin D, CoQ10, and then several different medications as well. She would talk to her. Cool. All right. Hopefully that helps. I'm sure there's somebody else out there also that is dealing with this. So we covered about everything we could on that. So that was good. That was very, very thorough. Next up, we want to talk about tap water. This is a fun topic. I have heard a lot about this. It's been all over in the headlines. Brown tap water after an SUV hits a hydrant, or that was in Ironton, Ohio. See, what's this one? Washington Post reporting what's known about Philadelphia's drinking water after a chemical spill. This is to say nothing about things like the EPA studies showing PFAS in drinking water, or the issues in Flint, or the issues in New Palestine. Recently, there's been all kinds of reasons why drinking water has been in the headlines. And that ultimately led me to finding this article from National Geographic called, and then I like this name, Is Tap Water Safe to Drink? Reading quickly from here, most U.S. residents don't need to worry about the safety of their tap water, but millions of Americans are still exposed to contaminants every year. It can take a water crisis to highlight where drinking water infrastructure is failing. One of the most devastating water crises in recent memory was the lead contamination in Flint, Michigan's drinking water in 2014. As of January 2023, 9 years after the initial contamination, residents are still dealing with the effects. Last year, a water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi left many of the city's 150,000 residents without potable water, a problem that persists today. In the U.S., about 90% of people get their tap water from a public water system. They call those PWS. Nice acronym. Water from a lake, reservoir, river, or aquifer is piped into a water treatment facility where chemicals are added to the water that bind to pollutants and are sifted out of the system. Some facilities use bacteria-killing UV light. Chemical disinfectants such as chlorine or chloramine are then added to the water to help kill any pathogens remaining in the water and any that might be lurking in your pipes when the water travels to your home. Of course, that's another element, is how old is your house? What are the pipes made out of? That's I didn't even think about that initially. Some water treatment facilities, from lack of funding or too little oversight, don't effectively clean their water. In 2015, about 21 million people living in the U.S. were exposed to tap water that violated federal guidelines, according to a study published in 2018. In 1974, Congress passed the Safe Drinking Water Act, which gave the Environmental Protection Agency the authority to regulate public tap water. When something like lead, for example, is shown to be harmful to human health, the EPA can set a limit for how much is allowed in water supplies. Limits are based on what amount is safe for human consumption and what is technologically feasible for water treatment facilities to accomplish. But these limits don't always result in water that is contaminant-free. Quote, there is a gap between what is legal and what is safe, unquote, said Sarah Grady, a science analyst at the Environmental Working Group. She adds that many regulations are based on decades-old science, which the Environmental Working Group has argued makes regulations outdated and inefficient. That was not what I expected out of that article. I thought this article was going to say, yes, your water's fine, calm down. But when at least 10% of the U.S. population may be drinking water that isn't completely safe, that's concerning. What are you thinking?
I think that there's a lot of different ways to go here. I think that as pharmacists, and we want to have this evidence-based study that I think, can convey the entirety of water safety, I think it becomes very hard.
Yeah.
When you're saying lead is good or bad, that's very easy. But when you're looking at the totality of everything from microbes to different types of metals, to then the source of the water is maybe coming out at a good quality, but it's going through these old pipes in a home, totally upsetting the apple cart there. It becomes so difficult, I think, to put together a very specific answer to this. So I think that it's just going to be, in my opinion, a lot of just generalities and just speaking about, I think individualized treatment to what you do here.
Yeah.
I think for me and my family, fortunately, I do have the capacity to put in water filtration. And it was at a time in my home where I could do it. I did do that. And is that because I read this evidence-based study that showed that my water in this town was no, but there are certain points where what do we do with our money? What is potentially advantageous versus what is black and white advantageous? What has no downsides outside of the actual money? Mm-hmm. And when I looked at it that way, not to mention taste and things that are a little more superficial and cooking quality and clothes and things like that, and even shower water, I decided to do it. And I do have the filtration, and that's not doable for everybody. And what becomes very difficult is where the bar goes up for those that probably need it more is low income, is rural, is areas where those financial bars become much higher. And also financial barriers become much higher.
Yeah.
And then furthermore, where you have to install a lot of these water treatments would still end up putting them through your old pipes to some extent.
Yeah.
So there's so many levels here. But in general, when you're looking at something like ingesting chlorine, the benefit of it is to kill microbes. So I get all of that at my local township level. But when it comes into my home, I get rid of the chlorine via this mechanism that then puts it through my fortunately new pipes.
Yeah.
So for me, I know that I've been able to do X, Y, Z. And again, I think there's so many different directions here. But if it's like this black or white recommendation of what you've got to do, or you're harming your family because you don't have that's not, I want to make that clear. That's not, it becomes, a hierarchy of finances and what is your local situation and what do you deem important. I think another, not to keep going off in tangents here, but the other thing you can do is the water that's most critical. Before we moved into this home, we had under sink filtration.
Yeah.
It was reverse osmosis. And yes, technically you could say some of the cons are it can be a little wasteful to water. That is true. It also does take out some of the minerals that can be beneficial. But I think if you have an overall healthy, balanced diet, I don't necessarily need the minerals from water that are coming, in my opinion, again, in a breakdown of positives and negatives. To me, that underwater unit was financially very viable. I think it was $150, $200. I had auto shipped, once or twice a year filters that you replace so that, this essentially what happens is after a couple years, then you're not really filtering anything. So you've got to stay on top of it, but there are ways to do that. And that was kind of plan B at one point for me. So I think there's a lot of different angles here, but those were my initial takes anyway.
That was always very important for my wife. I always thought she was just being ridiculous because I look around and I go, wow, the rest of the world doesn't have potable water at all. Like in Africa or in South America, just not having your kidneys stop functioning at 20 is a real problem because you don't have clean drinking water. What are we complaining about if our water tastes a little funny or whatever? It's fine. That was my perspective. Yeah. But I hadn't even thought about, no matter how clean the water is at the facility, it still has to get to you. Mm-hmm. And who knows what's in between those two points.
If your home was built in 1950, it's going to be different than it was built in 2015. There's just different standards and different, they're not using metal pipes. So I think too, not to get too philosophical here, but I think this applies to so many things when you're talking about diet or supplements. But there's a gap between, this was the quote, there's a gap between what is legal and what is safe. What do I need to necessitate black or white better health for me? Or what, hey, if I can spend this few bucks or take this extra step, what can possibly be beneficial? And I think versus what is damaging or illegal. I think those bars are so different. And I think that's so much what becomes the core of a lot of these chats about things like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Dante?
Yeah, I would say that, I fall somewhere on the same spectrum there. Definitely. And on the flip side, there's new legislation probably that's going to be passed soon. There's some stuff pending with additional government money being, funneled into these wastewater plants being built to help try and mitigate all of these potential issues and new contaminants that we're worried about, the, PFAS or whatever,
The forever chemicals.
The forever chemicals, yes.
Yeah.
Things that just stay in your body.
Yes, which apparently there are thousands, and now the EPA is going to start testing for, I think, 9 of them.
Yeah.
And so I think what you have to see happen is there's an organization like the EWG who serves as almost a little bit more of like the not the whistleblower, but kind of just they're a little more alarmist. You go on their website and you punch in your zip code, and you're going to see your town has levels of a certain contaminant that's 217 times the legal guideline, or
right.
48 times, or 711 times. Like, practically speaking, there's really nothing you can do. There's really nothing you should do about that, when you see that information. But it's useful because hopefully it's pushing the EPA and the individuals doing research at that level to say, okay, what's the merit to some of these concerns? It's a very large spectrum.
Yeah.
But at least the information's out there that, hey, this stuff is in the water. We should be mindful of it, but there's really not a whole lot you can do. Or you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it is the fact that we can get drinkable water from our sink at any point in time, unless you live in Flint, Michigan,
right, is
a modern miracle. That is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not to say that it's perfect.
Yep.
And there's always room for improvement, especially as we gain new information and have new research. And it's useful to have a group like the EWG
to say, hey, like all of these things exist.
Right.
You shouldn't panic. But then when you see it, like,
yeah, you can pull up on their website.
Yeah, you see chloroform, potential effect, cancer. Dichloroacetic acid, potential effect, cancer.
Cancer, yeah.
Nitrate, potential effect, cancer. You start to see that and you're like, holy crap, like maybe this is a little bit concerning.
Yeah, it freaks me out.
It's not that you shouldn't care, and maybe it can freak you out a little bit, but like Joey's saying, there's certainly a balanced approach that can be taken. If you're the family that bought at the beginning of the week, you go to Sam's Club and you buy 16 cases of water, maybe you should chill, like, because then there's the environmental perspective as well. If you can cut the bottled water down slightly and you funnel some of that money into a filter for your fridge or a filter under your sink or a Brita filter.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then sometimes, when the Brita filter goes bad and you forget to buy a new one, a couple of days of tap water is probably not the end of the world either. So some balance of all those things, I still think makes the most sense. Because, or again, if you have the ability to have a filtration that covers your whole home, then you probably will save money at the end of the day as far as all the bottled water that you would need to purchase.
Yeah.
So my goodness, there's so many ways to slice this. And then on a very micro level, hey, I'm going to bring a water bottle to work that I bought that has a filter in it. And so I can use the tap water from work, and I know that some level of this is being filtered. Great. If I go to a restaurant and I drink a glass or two of the tap water, I'm probably okay. I don't need to look at the waitress funny when she just says all we have is tap.
Right.
It's like there's these super intense, polarizing movements on this water. This whole water thing is the end of the world. But beyond a crises, beyond those sorts of situations, making little, what's the word? Not sacrifices, but little pivots
adjustments
here and there to some bottled water, some tap, some sparkling, some glass instead of plastic. I think that's the recipe. If everybody can mix it up a little, if possible.
And it is useful to have, not useful, this sounds terrible, but when there is a major crisis, it is a good reminder, if that's not your drinking water, of just how good we have it most of the time, that it is actually a big deal when there's lead pipes, that it is actually a big deal when a train derails and we burn off chemicals. Like, that's a big deal because that's not the norm, because our water is remarkably safe considering everything else.
Yeah. And it becomes so difficult too, because then you go into these things. Well, are you inviting more government regulation in to have these different levels change? And then are you trusting the government to say that it's clean after the train derailment? There's so many angles, the whole Aaron Brockovich stuff and all those things that can come of this. You can go down a rabbit hole. And I just still think it comes back to, if you are able to do something basic, again, like a system, like Dante said, even over time, it's not going to take much for you, especially honestly, there's a lot of crappy bottled water out there, for lack of a better term.
Well, you think mostly tap water, just put in a plastic bottle.
The one that's $4.99 for a case is $4.99 a case at the gas station for a reason. It is. And it doesn't mean you have to buy the $4.99 bottle of smart water either.
Right.
There's middle ground there, but you have to look at those kind of things too. I think that if you can put a little bit of investment to something that, again, maybe you can't draw like, hey, I got this amount of lead and I know lead's bad, so that means I'm harming my family if you can find a happy medium in between there and do something about it, I think overall it's a good move. These forever chemicals and stuff, I do think they're an issue. We've got plastics and remnants of plastics everywhere in our lives. And there's only so much we can do about it, but I think this is one of them that at a reasonable price you can.
And I should also say this. Not only can you look on the Environmental Working Group website to see what their rating of your local water supply is, the local water providers are required to put out a report every year about water quality and different issues. You're supposed to be able to go to the EPA website and find them all, but the EPA website
is rough.
It's rough. It's a government website, and it doesn't work very well. So I was able to, on the EPA's website, I could find my local water supply, but they didn't have a report. And then I went to my local municipality, to my town's website. I found the report on there. So it was available. It had been done. It just isn't being tracked on the EPA's website. So if you're curious, go check out your local government's website. Get as granular as you can. Look up the name on your water bill. That'll probably find it. And then you can get some details that way. So you will know just how bad it might be or not be. All right. This is it. I'm so excited. The whole reason I take part in this show is so I can get free medical advice. Gentlemen, after doing deep dives on cholesterol and ACVD, is that right? ASCVD. I forgot a letter in there. ASCVD.
It's all right.
I went and had a bunch of blood work done. I haven't gotten all of it back because apparently it takes a really long time to do a lipo-A.
LP(a).
That's the one.
I guess.
Test. Yeah. It's still coming back. But I did do my annual blood work, got that back, had a checkup with my doctor this past week, and I had some concerning news. Apparently, my LDL-C and my ApoB, right? That's what I was confusing. The LP(a), ApoB.
Apo-big B.
That's the one. Talk to my doctor. The ApoB and my LDL-C are higher than they should be. So, help me out here. Let's look at these. I know sometimes we have issues where we're talking about somebody else's numbers and we can't get more details from them. I'm right here. What do I need to do? Last year, my total cholesterol was 191. This year, it's 210. Last year, my LDL-C was 113 milligrams per deciliter. Now it's up to 153. I've been making positive changes. I've been in the gym. I've been working out. I'm tracking what I'm eating. What is going on?
Yeah, this is tough. I mean, this is tough. We're obviously not PCPs and cardiologists. And so I think what we can do for you is at least shed light on what some of those individuals might be thinking and how treatment is guided from this point. And then, I don't know, have an evidence-based conversation about it, but then also just, hey, Joe, this is what I've been reading and this is kind of what's making sense to me at this stage.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, leave you with the power to do as you please.
I will try.
Ask more questions, and that's all we can do. So I would say it might be helpful to start with so you're a PCP or you talk to your PCP about this. What happens? Are you going to be put on a statin? Are you going to be put on some other cholesterol lowering therapy? Given the totality of this and the other values that we have on your blood work.
Yeah.
You, based on age, based on blood pressure, other things, your ASCVD 10-year risk still would keep you below the cut point that would warrant therapy. That's not to say a doctor wouldn't start you on a statin or anything like that. But I think this is an important part to understand that because you're still young, even though your cholesterol is elevated, we're not going to put you on a statin. We're going to wait.
Okay.
You know, you've made some lifestyle changes. I think we don't need to treat this aggressively. And I think that starting here is at least where you can see some of the controversy, some of maybe how medicine will change.
Yeah.
How different practitioners have already changed the way they're practicing, because there is evidence to say that, hey, those numbers might look like something we want to treat. But the doctor who says, no, look, this is where you fall on the risk spectrum. We're going to wait. You've made a ton of positive changes in lifestyle. You eat well, you're exercising. Let's just continue to monitor. You're not afraid to get your blood work done. So just come back in.
Not a bit.
Joey and I a little
Donator.
more.
Yeah. I get a little skittish with it still.
Oh, no, the needles they use for taking samples are teeny tiny compared to the platelet needles that just stay in your arms. Those are sizable.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry, did I freak you out? You getting lightheaded?
Fall over. Yeah. So what will we do here? I think I'm falling into a little more of the aggressive category of treatment. You know, it's why do we even care about this? We know atherosclerosis, the plaque buildup in the arteries. Isn't something that happens overnight. It's an insidious process. It starts very early. It can progress over time. It's hard to undo what's been done once the cholesterol has made its way into the vasculature and the plaques harden, and the whole cascade of the pathophysiology of the whole thing. It's hard to undo all of that. That's why we care.
Right.
We know that it has the potential to harm. It's been a devastating disease over the course of history over the last 100 years. And so I'm a little more reluctant at this point to say, hey, let's just sit back and wait. Just knowing how devastating that the consequences can be of atherosclerosis and the buildup, of that cholesterol.
Between family history and my own capacity, I'm not afraid of taking action. As you guys know, I mean, I've radically altered my diet, increasing the exercise. I'm down to try different things. I want to live to 100. I want to be able to play with my grandkids and my great grandkids. I want to be physically capable. So I don't mind making changes.
So one change that you did make, I'm just kind of going back to some of what we do here, is the red yeast rice. So you were taking red yeast rice prior to 20 to 20.
Yes.
Literally, you were taking it, you stopped because your blood work was good. I mean, was it that black and white or?
Yes.
No, because I think that.
Yes, it was that black and white.
Even ApoB numbers, I would be interested because we kind of know we can get some movement on LDL with red yeast rice.
Yeah.
But it's some of those downline things that, quite honestly, that statins have shown to benefit that we're not sure red yeast rice does.
Fair
so
enough.
It would have been interesting to be able to see a little more of those, the more cutting edge values like the ApoB, et cetera, a difference in that. Not that would have been the whole cause, but I think in 1 year, somebody going from 39 to 40,
Yeah.
I think that could have been a major change potentially.
I did. I had good numbers. And so what was working, I stopped doing. And so that's certainly an element of it. So red yeast rice. Okay. Diet, what kind of changes do I need to make there? You guys know that I keep a fairly, ketogenic paleo Mediterranean style diet is the easiest way to explain it. Yeah. I don't eat sugar,
I think with those diets, and again, not everybody responds in the same way. I mean, this is another thing that's so individualized, but the stock recommendation is to absolutely try to replace most of your saturated fat sources with unsaturated sources.
Okay, so saturated fat sources are things like,
we're looking at more like red meats.
Okay.
So all of those, sort of red meat animal fats, which we all love, and doesn't mean you have to. Yeah, doesn't mean that you eliminate them. But again, it's like the zero sum game kind of thing. Like it's all about what you're replacing it with here.
Right.
And so unsaturated sources, try to implement a little more salmon, not adding those things, not adding nuts, avocado, salmon. You want to start to replace some of it with those things. Even white meats that are lower in saturated fat, turkey, chicken, ground chicken, easy things to kind of mix in can definitely help.
So I can still get fajitas. I just have to get I have to get chicken instead of steak.
Switch the balance a little bit. Yeah. Nuts, seeds, avocados, olive oils.
I eat a lot of those.
Less adding butter if that's something that individuals doing. Those are not easy things, but again, stock recommendations that can make a difference. We know that dietary patterns that are low in fiber have the tendency to, see, lipid panels that look similarly to this. So I would say eating at least 30 grams of fiber from added fruits and vegetables can absolutely help. You're not eating a ton of refined carbohydrates, the pastries, sweets, breakfast cereals.
None.
But that's another huge example that will make a difference for people.
Yeah.
Lifestyle factors. We know that excess body fat is something that can make a difference.
I'm working on it.
Not saying that you have a multitude of body fat that you need to lose, but it's, taking a look at someone's waist circumference beyond just the scale can help shed light on that. You can get a better look at, visceral adiposity, central adiposity, on the midsection tends to be a little more associated with these adverse cardiac events. I guess not specifically elevated LDL cholesterol and ApoB, but we know that trying to reduce that can help, via, caloric restriction and, exercise and such. For others, smoking and nicotine's a stock recommendation. We don't have to go, into that.
I don't do that.
But family history is huge. Not only, if somebody in your family has had high cholesterol, but, what you have a laundry list of individuals who have had stroke, heart attack, all of those things might warrant your practitioner to treat a little more aggressively.
Fair enough.
Definitely.
Some more minor factors too, especially when we're looking at like the more cutting edge numbers, like the ApoB. They did a study. They just looked at, again, some of this is chicken or egg, but 7,381 participants, 18 to 75 in China. Less than 6 hours of sleep is associated with higher ApoB versus even 7 or 8. Just again, looking at some of these things, and also coffee. Over 2 cups a day is linked to higher.
No.
Now, we've talked about caffeine before. There's other benefits to it. And there's also, what is 2 cups?
Yeah.
Okay. I have 2 cups of, all right, I think we know that. So that would take some more digging. But in general, it's just, again, a little more about moderation, quality of sleep, that can have effects, again, at a lower level than the things Dante had mentioned, but just as an aside.
All right.
I think it's important, again, to highlight what we kind of talked about at the beginning here, and maybe where you'll see some of these treatments start to change. Again, the ASCVD, the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease risk calculator, is looking at what risk are you at in the next 10 years.
Right.
And so you're 40.
Yes,
I'm about 30. Joey's 40. Like we're sorry, guys.
Those barriers.
You outed us.
40.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
The likelihood of you having an event at that age is low.
Right.
Regardless. So why do we care that much what your risk is over the next 10 years? Because we need to look at 20 years, 30 years.
Because I don't care about the next 10 years. I care about the next 40 years.
I mean, if you're like, dude, I'm cool, I'll check out after 50. Like, we get as much done in this life before 50, and then whatever.
Yeah.
I mean,
no.
Hey, if we're on Generation Health, trying to live long and maximize our health for a generation and the next generation, and all these sorts of things, then we're talking like what's our risk into our 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so that's when this more aggressive treatment, starting a statin earlier, maybe it's a PCSK9 inhibitor, who knows, some of these newer drugs. It changes the conversation drastically, because the earlier that you can get these levels in check is just one box to check,
right,
that can lower your risk for these downline events. Again, because yes, the next 10 years is important, and it's great that our risk over the next 10 years is low. But when you start looking beyond that, that's where the real work is done. And I think that, and I'm admittedly taking a lot of this from Dr. Peter Attia, who he's talked with tons of cholesterol experts. He knows a crap ton about cholesterol. He treats his He treats most of his patients a little bit differently than this current 10-year ASCVD risk calculator. And he highlights a lot of this in his book that he just put out. And it's more of this preventative outlook versus like, let's just worry about the next 10 years and we're good and we'll figure out we're all going to be sick in our 70s and 80s anyway.
Right.
Kind of, not saying that is the mentality, but that's kind of what you're saying by not aggressively doing something at this point now. And so he'll go as far as saying, I'm looking to get my own LDL cholesterol, my own ApoB to infantile levels.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of people that just doesn't register, it's unheard of, it's too aggressive. Cholesterol is important for all these processes in our body. Well, if as a basically his way of looking at it is, if you are a child, if you're an infant, if you're very young, that's arguably the most important time for growth and development. And we know at that age you have very, very, very low ApoB. So why can't we extrapolate this into individuals
later
in their 40s and 50s?
Yeah,
we need to get people, not that we need to get everybody to that number, but we need to push this way lower than where the current cut points are. And we need to do so, quick.
Aggressively. All right.
So it's just, I think cholesterol is something that's going to come up time and time again on this show.
Yep.
With questions and with kind of now the interest that I've taken in it. And then also, man, I sense that there's a shift in how early doctors are going to start treating to numbers differently.
Yeah. I'm going to take this stuff seriously. I'm going to start taking action, and I'll get some more red yeast rice and cut out the saturated fat, keep weightlifting, and hopefully we'll check back.
It's a nice in between. Obviously, things like red yeast rice and bergamot, like I said before, do not have the studies showing the overall long-term benefits.
Right.
But at least if there are just people for various reasons, some of them good, some of them, controversial, that they're not going to start a statin, they're not going to take a statin for whatever that reason may be, if it's personal, there are at least, I'm not saying superior or equal, I'm saying some options in the middle ground that we have seen at least move some of these numbers, and over time can hopefully unpack even more of what they do or are not doing as we kind of move forward.
Fair enough.
We actually, and additionally, we won't go crazy in depth with this, but you mentioned the pending LP(a) blood work.
Yes.
And so maybe we'll talk about that more once we get it back.
Yeah.
But this is another lipoprotein measurement that is something that when you're looking at LDL cholesterol, ApoB, VL, DL, these other measures, those we have control over for the most part with dietary interventions, with statins, with supplements. We can move the needle on those. With LP(a), this is something that is primarily genetic. And so as of right now, there are some clinical trials going on, but there's no way to really reduce your LP(a). And so then what do we actually do with that information? So if let's just say in theory, Tyler, you get your LP(a) back and that is also a little bit elevated.
Yep.
That would just make somebody like Peter Attia, who just lives in that world a little more, would even make him more apt to treating what he can treat with statins, with any sort of cholesterol lowering agents, because again, that's the lever that we can pull at this time to lower your risk in the long term, because we just don't have a whole lot that we can do with LP(a) at this time.
That makes sense.
So it's just they're kind of on two distinct tracks, if you think of it that way. The ApoB, which are basically the surface proteins on all of these low density lipoproteins, those are what we have control over. LP(a) is a little bit more of much more of a genetic hereditary issue. Typically what you see, in somebody who's 4 or 5 years old is what you'll see. The level will be pretty much the same when they're 55. That's generally what they're showing. And so it's very important to then, yes, we looked at a few levels or a few results on your blood work, but this is a much bigger picture, and we're learning about new things to test and new things to factor into these risks, these risk scores. There's even calculators that will factor in Lp(a) to the current ASCVD risk calculator. So maybe if in theory that is a little more elevated, that might bump somebody to the treatment cut point.
Fair enough.
So as you're seeing, there's probably people think statins are being overused and they're all over the place as it is. Well, I think it's going to be
even higher.
Even higher. I do. Yeah. And and I think at this point for good reason.
Yeah.
Truly.
All right. We'll get serious. That is it for us today. All of the products that we mentioned are available on our website. It is askjoedimatteo.com, askjoedimatteo.com. That is also where you can get on our mailing list to find out about sales. You can find past episodes of this show. You can find episodes of the original show, Ask Joe DiMatteo, that started all of this. If you have any questions, please email us, questions@askjoedimatteo.com. Show notes are available on any of the video sites where we post these, as well as on the podcasting websites where you might be listening. If you are only listening, you're missing out on the fun. We do post these as video on YouTube and Rumble. We'll see how much longer we stay on YouTube because they keep giving us grief because we say the wrong things, apparently. But go check them out, YouTube, Rumble. Go to Generation Health. You'll find us there. Big thanks to Josiah Schweinberg, keeping us looking good. Michael Deppish, our editor. Joyce Gibb, our nurse practitioner who handles private consults. Diane Silverman manages our products. Terry does scheduling. Cecilia does distribution. Joey DiMatteo, Dante DiMatteo. I don't know why those names always catch me by surprise, as if you're not at the bottom of the list every single time. I'm Tyler Andrews, and that is it for us this week. Now, the question is, what are you going to do with what you've heard? Are you just listening and being entertained? Or are you going to take action and become part of this generation, Generation Health?